Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. So our lighting here is a bit off. My customary overhead lamp is not functioning. It's not been determined yet whether it is something wrong with the switch on the lamp itself or with the wiring in the wall. Sometimes it comes on and sometimes it doesn't. And so it's a big question. Rather than try to set something up, I thought I would just use the little side lamp here and let it go with subpar lighting. I have not been doing a lot of reading lately. For one thing, the humidity has really sapped my energy. Lethargy is the name of the day. And then there have been as well other activities needing to be done, or simply going out and leaving the house to find a more amenable environment. Though I have not been reading a lot, I have continued to watch YouTube, BookTube particularly. And I've had thoughts floating around in my head which haven't gelled into any kind of coherence as yet. But I thought, since I am putting off attempting any of my reading tonight, to try to see what I can make of them. Recently, the New York Times published a list of the 100 best books written this century. So it's 25 years into the century, and they figured that they could compile such a list. And different booktubers have reacted to it in different ways. And I've realized that any such list like that, any kind of canon, if you will, Harold Bloom famously laid out what he called the Western canon. Any kind of list making like that is at bottom useful in that it is a compilation of the prejudices and pretensions of the compiler and nothing else. Now, if and a lot of booktubers like to make lists of this sort. So the 10 best blah, 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 the 100 greatest, blah, blah, blah. And so these sorts of lists are useful to the extent that that booktuber's prejudices and pretensions are akin to my own. And that is a very useful function. For the literary historian, it will have another useful function later on down the line. So this New York Times list, somebody will say, oh, it's very interesting that all of such and such a sort of book made the list, but all of another sort was completely excluded from the list. One never knows the workings of time. And I've seen a couple of sort of egregious acts of hubris on YouTube lately. And one of them, and I don't want to go into the context all that much, a YouTuber that I follow who is a writer of poetry went off, and I think we are all inclined to do this sort of thing now and again, was talking to, he was making you statements. You have reached the peak of your, I don't know, of your creativity, of your fame, of your renown. And I believe he was addressing that to a certain class of poets, academic poets, perhaps. And he said, you at this moment in time have the most readers you will ever have. Right now, on a daily basis, more people read my poetry than read yours. And how will anybody read your poems in the future when they do not read them today? So, anybody with an inkling of literary history under their belt will know the fallacy right there. Very few people knew Emily Dickinson's poetry in her day. I think it was mostly published anonymously when it was published, and that was infrequent. Nobody could have predicted, although Thomas Wentworth Higginson may well have had ideas. We see this sort of thing all the time. After his death, possibly for 100 years after his death, I'm not sure, the composer Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, something, J.S. Bach, was unknown. Nobody knew him. And the winds blew a different direction, and now he is all of our favorite classical composer. Some of ours. So one cannot predict. I remember during the time of the presidency of Ronald Reagan, he was particularly prone to making statements which read the future. And I did not jot any of his exact statements down, but he would say things to the effect that the future will look back upon my presidency and say, this was a great time in America. This was the greatest presidency. The winds may shift again, but very shortly after, how long are we after the Reagan presidency now? 50 years, 40 years? Already the lie has been revealed. One does not know what the future will bring. There is an event in BookTube going on called Garb August, in which people on purpose read books which are considered trashy. And another booktuber said, there are books which are objectively garbage or trash. And a well-read critic can determine which books those are. And there again, I would say, it is bordering on the hubristic to make such an assertion. We never know what the future holds. None of us for our own poetry, nobody for the writing of any other person. At best, we may know a little bit about our own prejudices, but how the future will see today is completely unknowable. The poet that I was talking about criticized T.S. Eliot and all of his descendants, and I think he was grouping under his descendants the academic poets, meaning poets who teach in schools. Now, T.S. Eliot was not an academic poet, and he mischaracterized Eliot as saying Eliot wanted to fashion a good old boys club, the entrance to which only, I don't know, professors or something like that could be allowed. Nothing could be further from the truth about Eliot. Eliot destroyed the careers of many poets contemporary to him and that came after, because after reading Eliot, nobody wanted to read anything else. That was just the sad fortunes of the situation in which he found himself. Eliot, of course, continues to be read. Academic poets, I would argue that it is on a case-to-case basis, as with everything else. There may be an academic poet who is read in 200 years, and there may be many who are not. That is quite possible. Similarly, having a present-day readership means nothing to posterity. I think, was it Robert Southey was well read in his day, and nobody looks at him now or his work. So I just suppose I wanted to get that off of my chest, that nobody really can say with certainty what the future will say about anything written in the present day of us. The poet was saying, you are going to be forgotten. In the long run, all of us are going to be forgotten. It's inescapable. It just is a matter of time. Is something that I wrote going to last 5 years before it falls into oblivion, or is it going to last 500 years before it falls into oblivion? None of us can say. It all will fall into oblivion. We know that much. That, of course, does not make the effort at writing something, the effort at compiling a hierarchy of greatness or what have you, a list, a canon, that does not make any of those things worthless activities. We, by making our petty, pathetic stabs at setting up a hierarchy or a canon, we are exercising our critical facility or faculty, and that in itself is an important activity for us to do. The future may look back upon us and laugh. That indeed is the function of hindsight in most cases. So I will just leave these brief, fleeting thoughts there. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.